Hello. Now we are going to begin the articulation unit, and this is part 1. So first, let me remind you that we have two definitions for resonance. One that has to do with general resonance of an air, filled container as it resonates to a sound that is played in it. So that is, we spoke about the quarter wave resonators, and we call these acoustic resonators, air-filled containers, where the container shapes the column of air inside of it in a certain way, and based on that shape and size and configuration, that is going to make the resonant frequencies of the tube kind of adjusted and have a certain bandwidth based on the characteristics of the tube and so on. So now, when we look at it more connected with the speech as the vocal tract is a resonator, an air-filled container, basically. So we look at resonance in a more precise way. We define it as the result of filtering the sound source passing through the supraglottic cavities of the vocal tract. So the vocal folds close off the vocal tract on the bottom. Above the vocal folds, you call that space the supraglottic space. From there to your lips or to adenoids, that ends the vocal tract. So all of this area acts as a one quarter wave resonator that is a broadly band resonator, and it selectively takes out the odd frequencies and the even frequencies and leaves in the odd frequencies. So we get the formants this way. And because of doing that, being selective, we call it like a filter. So it filters the sound, and the source that releases the sound into that filter is the vocal folds. So this is why we spoke about source and filter theory or model. So in speech, the supraglottic cavities are shaped by the articulators in terms of the shape and for example, the configuration of the vocal tract and the movement of the articulators, like the lips and the tongue, and basically the mobile articulators that can go back and forth and perform movements. Resonant frequencies are determined by the size of the cavity, by the length of the cavity, and by the configuration. So, for example, we discussed the size of the vocal tract when you say ah, and we explained that how the tongue goes back and sits down, is pulled down and back, and that is going to constrict the area where F1 would resonate in the lower pharynx. And then when you say ah, because the tongue is pulled back and down, it leaves the space in the oral cavity larger, and that makes F2 lower. And F3 is also relatively lower. So, a lot of it depends on the space itself. Then the length, of course, if you add length to the tube, like ooh, that's going to, by nature, bring down the frequency. Configuration, like controlling the diameter of that tube, and kind of shaping it and controlling it in different places at different times. For example, configuration, if you have a container that is circular, or spherical, it will give you a sound that's very different than one that's cylindrical. And if you have two tubes connected to one, they will give you a different tone. So configuration is how the whole vocal tract is kind of modified all along it, in terms of width, in terms of constrictions and so on, constriction points and so on. So we know now the formants, which are the resonances that occur in the vocal tract, and these resonances are like F1, F2, F3, and so on, which mean R1, R3, R5, R7. So you leave the evens and leave, take out the evens and leave the odds, and these will be called formants of the vocal tract. We said the vocal tract can be modified frequently, and the mainly, primary modifiers are the pharyngeal muscles themselves. We call them the pharyngeal constrictors. So, basically the pharynx is made out of muscle walls, like the posterior pharyngeal wall, and then the lateral wall, and then another lateral wall, right and left, and then the posterior. How these walls are formed? They are actually they have like 3 sheets of muscle, and they go like this. Each one is like an L shape. So you have one like this, and then you have the other one on the other side like that. So they each one gives half to make the posterior pharyngeal wall, and then you have, one bends a little to the right to make the right wall, pharyngeal wall, and then one can makes the lateral left pharyngeal wall, and it will be like this. There is no anterior pharyngeal wall; it does not exist. So there are only 3 walls. So the velum is a major modifier. The soft palate lifts up when you make oral sounds, and when you say the 3 nasal sounds, the velum goes down so the air can escape over it, go to your nose. The tongue is again a major modifier. Anywhere that it is going to raise frequency, because it fills a space and it makes it smaller or constricted. If it goes away from a space, it leaves that space larger, and air is going to travel longer distances. It will resonate at a lower frequency. The mandible, obviously, if you drop it, you are going to increase the space. That will affect frequency. If you constrict it or make a small opening, that will also alter resonant frequencies. Lips, if you retract them like that, when I say E, that is going to give you a short vocal tract, and it will give you, it will affect resonance in terms of giving less space. If you say ooh, it's going to raise, lower pitch much more than the E. So we are going to look at the basic segments of the vocal tract, and then we look at the muscles at some point. We are going to see how the sounds resonate and how they are produced, and that will be the unit on articulation and resonance. So the pharynx is a vertical tube that extends from right above the vocal folds, goes up to the end, the posterior end of the nasal cavity. So that vertical tube is connected to the oral cavity, which is one tube by itself, and then the nasal cavity. So these 3 tubes together give the vocal tract the ability to be a broadly tuned resonator. So let's look at the anatomic parts of the vocal tract. And it consists of the nasopharynx, oro, and laryngopharynx. And if you just simply look at the name itself, you are going to know the location. Let's see. Here is the larynx, and this part above the larynx, this is called the laryngopharynx. And the part that's across from the oral cavity, this area, is called the oropharynx. But you don't say L. you just take the L out and you say O, rho, when you combine. And then at the posterior end of the nasal cavity, because it's a part of the nasal cavity, you call it, it marks the posterior end, you call it the nasopharynx. So again, laryngo, or sometimes the laryngopharynx is called the the lower pharynx. You could see the velum, and when it is open like this, it shows that you are breathing. So now let's look at the muscles that make the pharyngeal walls. They are called the pharyngeal constrictors. That means, they come together like there's one here this is the right pharyngeal wall, a lateral, and this is the left lateral pharyngeal wall. And then each one kind of curves or bends, and they make that L shape, and they give you the posterior pharyngeal wall. So, and of course, they in the back, they unite like this. And in the front, they're attached to other things in the oral cavity and different things. So these muscles are gonna, when they contract, they constrict, they narrow the pharynx. And when they dilate, they relax, they can dilate the pharynx. Another way to dilate it is to lift it up and kind of, open it. As you lift it up, you enlarge it, like when you have a bag or something, lift it up and make it larger as it goes up, because there's more room up here for expansion. So let's look at these. The area where the two parts unite in the back, this is the posterior. This is the larynx. You could see the laryngeal inlet and the epiglottis and the back of the tongue. And then you could see the velum here, and you can see the nasal cavity, the back of the nasal cavity. So this is the posterior view of the pharyngeal muscles. The line where they meet, the two sides fuse, is called the median pharyngeal raphe, R-A-P-H-E, the median pharyngeal raphe. So if you look carefully from above, the top, you are going to find some muscle fiber oriented kind of almost, horizontally almost. That fiber, that muscle here is the superior pharyngeal constrictor. And the muscle then, so this is the muscle, and then behind it and lower comes the other muscle. And you can see overlapping on part of it like that. That is the median or middle pharyngeal constrictor. And it's like, almost like a kind of a triangle. And then on the back of the medial, overlapping, you have the inferior. You notice the orientation of the fibers. They become more slanted, more oblique as you go down. And when they are oriented in different ways, they give strength to the structures. So now we have the superior pharyngeal constrictor, the medial and the inferior. And then the inferior has two segments, one big segment here and one smaller segment here. The lower segment is called the cricopharyngeus, where this muscle originates on the cricoid cartilage, the base of the larynx. On the sides of the cricoid cartilage, that muscle originates. And then turns around, each one makes like a half like this, and then they turn around, and then they meet and fuse like this to make the lower pharyngeal, the lower segment of the pharynx, which is the opening, the beginning of the esophagus, where that takes food to the stomach. You notice the esophagus is sitting behind the laryngeal inlet, and if you are looking this way, then you have the laryngeal inlet, your airway, and then behind it you have the esophagus. So the food has to cross over when the epiglottis bends to cover the larynx and the vocal folds and so on. And then food and liquid are gonna go directly into the esophagus. So let's look at these. This is the cricoid, the lateral margins of the cricoid or surfaces. You have one on each side. That's that's like a seashell, and it fans out and bends, and the other one fans out and bends, and they go like this. When they contract, they narrow, they squeeze the top of the esophagus closed. So they work so that when food comes in, and then you kind of squeeze that cricopharyngeus muscle, squeeze it. This is when you feel it, you have swallowed. Like you try it, swallow. When you achieve that swallow at the end, and you feel that constriction here, that is the cricopharyngeus constricting and propelling things down toward the stomach. So here are the functions of the superior, and then the medial and the inferior. So the inferior has a segment of it. The lower segment is the cricopharyngeus, which is one part, and it arises from the cricoid and thyroid cartilages, and it reduces the diameter of the lower pharynx, or constricts the top segment of the esophagus. It actually acts almost like a sphincter for the esophagus. Then we have the stylopharyngeus. That's another muscle, the stylopharyngeus. You could see here the styloid process, and the styloid process has three muscles coming down from it. There's the Styloglossus going to the base of the tongue, and there is the stylohyoid that we study it as part of the suprahyoid muscles. And then we have the other one that goes down, back, and down, and that is the stylopharyngeus. It goes from the styloid process and then comes, goes back and connects with the pharyngeal constrictor muscles. So the stylopharyngeus arises from the styloid process, and it courses down to insert into the superior and middle pharyngeal constrictors, and the functions, some of the fibers insert into the posterior margins of the thyroid cartilage. The innervation is by the glossopharyngeal nerve. The functions, the job of this muscle is basically, where it contracts, is going to lift up the pharynx. It opens the pharynx up and elevates it and dilates it for swallowing. There are two of them, two sides, and so they kind of lift up and elevate. Elevate is lifting up. Dilate, lift up and dilate. So here is what I told you about the styloglossus, the stylohyoid, and then the stylopharyngeus, and show the connections that it has with the structures we spoke about here. And so now there's also the sulpinopharyngeus, but which is here, but we're not going to spend too much time on it. So the oral cavity, the boundaries of it. Now we spoke about the pharynx, we spoke about the structure of it, because this is not an anatomy class, it's, just a quick review. The oral cavity, the boundaries are from the lips to the facial pillars that makes the anterior posterior, and then from one side of the cheek to the other, that is the lateral boundaries. And then, of course, the hard palate and the soft palate make the top of the oral cavity, and the lower is the, various, like the floor of the jaw, and you have the tongue, sitting there. So the major landmarks for speech that are found in the oral cavity include the teeth, because when you say teeth, you make kind of place your tongue between the two teeth. So the teeth are immobile articulators, as opposed to the tongue that is a mobile articulator. You use the teeth to make the sounds th, as in thumb, or then. So these are two sounds, and then f and v. These are the English sounds that are called, what do you call them? Like they have the word dental in them, like lingua dental. You have labiodental, and you have another labiodental. So then you have the alveolar ridge, which is, if you look at the two top front teeth, and inside the gum line, you can touch it when you say s, or you say t, 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 or you say z. So all of these sounds are alveolar sounds, and made by the contact between the tongue, tongue tip, and the alveolar ridge. This is why I call them alveolar sounds. So it is the anterior part of the hard palate, in a place that's called the premaxilla, and it is we use it to make these sounds t and d, n, s, z. So we also use it to make l, as in light, light. And then the velum, or the soft palate, it is used for production of the sounds k, g, and So here you could see the oral cavity, the bounds of the lips, and then the facial pillars will be these pillars here that you could see, the arches, or palatal arches sometimes called, and you can see the oropharynx and inside there, and you can see now the palatine tonsils right behind the facial pillar. This is a submucous cleft, where you could see here that the palate is not fused well, and you could see even the uvula split. So this person has some kind of cleft palate. Let's look now at the roof of the oral cavity, and you're looking now at the hard palate, and we'll see, as you can see, it has a line in the middle, and each half of the hard palate grows by itself as one shelf of kind of bone, and goes to the midline, and the other half grows and goes to the midline, and then they start to unite in the front, and then they fuse as you go back. You fuse. So fusion of the hard palate and the soft palate is always from the front to the back. It fuses over time as the fetus is developing, and the frontal tissue unites and fuses together first like a zipper, and then it's gonna go backwards until it ends the soft palate. When you look here, you can see the two incisors. We call them the two maxillary incisors. An incisor is a cutter. So the teeth that cut are the four front teeth. You have the two central incisors, lateral incisors, and then you have the canines. The canines are for tearing. Like if you have a piece of steak, the canines are like, they tear. But the ones that what do you call them, bite off the food and cut it, are the incisors. The other ones, see how flat they are all grinders. but we'll get to that because you are going to have to know the names of the teeth, and you are going to be able to label each one. So from the front to the back, maxillary incisors, then behind that immediately you start the area that's this like a little triangle here. You can actually include this. That's called the premaxilla. And you can see behind the two maxillary incisors, that little area here is the alveolar ridge. This is where you make the sound st, d, l. Then as you go back, you have this one area is called the palatal process of the palatine process of the maxilla, left and right. And this is bone. Beneath this is bone, and it's covered with epithelium. Then you could see across from the last tooth, and you can go this way to the other tooth. That marks the end of the hard palate, the end of the hard bone. Then you begin, after that, there's, the hard palatine processes. And then you have another bone, piece of bone here, that is two pieces, left and right. And that area is called the palatal process of the palatine bone. So that's called the palatine bone. It's a big bone, and it has, parts that are rising and parts, but this is like almost like a floor, and it is embedded. It is fused with the palatal processes, and fused together, so it makes the posterior part of the hard palate. You notice some structures here, like muscle tissue and actually tendon tissue here and here. And if you go from here and just go across a line from side to side, this area is called the palatal aponeurosis. Palatal aponeurosis. That is a tendon that is attached onto the margins of the palatine bone, and it is the connection point for connecting the soft palate muscles with the hard palate. So the palatal aponeurosis is again a tendon that is made by a muscle that called the tensor palatini muscle, and it sends down the tendon, and then it inserts onto the posterior margins of the palatine bone, and then the other muscles of the soft palate muscles attach to the tendon, and then now you are attaching the muscle to the hard palate. So you have the soft palate that can move and the hard that doesn't. You can see here the back of the soft palate, and you can see from the top, you can see the nasal cavities that are sitting on the other side of the hard palate, so on top of the hard palate. So we are going to, again, look at the velum. Part of the velum from the beginning, the soft palate, the first part that is not part of the hard palate, the tendon, that is the palatal aponeurosis. So that is the beginning of the soft palate. The palatal aponeurosis connects the soft palate to the hard palate, and it serves as a point of attachment for the velar muscles to attach to the hard palate, except for one muscle, which is the musculus uvulus, and I'll explain to you later how it works, how it inserts. So the velum consists of muscles, a whole bunch of muscles that are interwoven together, and it has nerve tissue, blood vessels, epithelial, an epithelial casing that covers the top and the bottom of it. So when you open your mouth, you can see, or you can touch the epithelium that is lining. It is soft tissue that has moisture and things. So then, how do we make the velum do work? How do we lift it up? How do we, kind of pull it, pull it back and make it seal? How do we do that? So it has muscles of elevation, and it has muscles of, depressor muscles that bring it down, and it has a tensor muscles that make it, stiff when you want it to be. So these include the elevators are called the levator villi palatini or the levator villi palati. Either way is fine. And also you have the musculus, uvulus. These are the two elevators. And then tensor muscle is the tensor villi palatini. And then the depressor muscles are the palatoglossus and the palatopharyngeus. We are going to go over this. So first, in general, all the palatal muscles are innervated by a hub of nerve tissue that come from two cranial nerves, from nerve number 10 and 11. They come together, extend branches, and make like a hub that's called the pharyngeal plexus. And then the only one that has its own innervation is the tensor villi palatini. It is innervated by cranial nerve number 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. So now let's look at the muscles one by one. The levator villi palatini, it makes the bulk of the velum. Let me show you, and then we come back to the insertion. So this is the posterior view. I am looking this way. You're looking from here. So this is the back of the nose, nasal cavities, and this is a bone that separates the right side of the nasal cavity from the left. So you have two nasal cavities. And then the velum. So you could see the musculus uvulus here, and you could see this muscle coming in like a hammock. Coming in, just going like this. The other one coming down like this. And they go, the muscles fiber goes under the musculus uvulus, and they intermesh like this. So it's almost like holding it and helping it. And then when they elevate, just like a hammock, when they contract, they lift up the velum, just like a hammock. Imagine if someone is sleeping in a hammock and get two people, strong people, who would hold from each and then just lift up. So that is the muscle that's the one that makes the bulk of the velum, and it sends its fibers, and they go and interconnect under and actually above the musculus uvulus. So let's go back to the original insertion. So this levator villi palatini, it has two sides, and it originates on the petraeus portion. Petraeus from petra means rock. So from the hard rocky area of the temporal bone that is behind your ear, and also goes above the side of your face here, the temporal bone that covers the temporal cortex. And then it originates on the petraeus portion of the temporal bone and the medial wall. So it has two origins, and the medial wall of the eustachian tube, along the medial wall, two origins. And it goes down and forward to insert onto the palatal aponeurosis. I'll show you in just a minute. So, villi palatini, as it goes down, and like that. It's going to, edges of it are going to connect onto the palatopharyngeus, and then parts of it are going to go under the Musculus uvulus and interconnect, and parts are going to go above and interconnect. And they kind of sandwich in between them the uvulus. The action, obviously, from the word levator is to lift up, or elevator. So the levators, Velata palatini, they elevate and retract the posterior part of the velum. So you just, because they are coming from behind, like from above and at an angle, when they pull back and up. So you could see now this view, you are also looking from behind. That's the posterior view. And this is the petrous portion. This is like the hard part, stone, and kind of almost like, it feels like a rock. And this muscle originates there, and then it goes down, and then it connects with the palatopharyngeus somewhere here. And then the tissues, as you could see, they go from one side and cross and intermesh with the other side. So you could see the arrows pointing up. That is pulling toward the origin of the muscle. So as they pull, they elevate the velum. Now you could see the palatal arches that I showed you in the previous few images. This is the front. You know, this is the front, and this is the back, if you look from the back. So you have two different muscles making the palatal arches. We'll come to that at some point. You could see now the Musculus uvulus, how it works here, and we'll discuss it now. So, see this bone that separates the right side, or that divides the nasal cavity into two cavities? That is called the vomer bone. And on the very bottom base of the vomer bone, and where it meets with the palatine bone, that is called the posterior nasal spine. Posterior nasal spine. The Musculus uvulus connects onto the posterior nasal spine and courses back, and you can see it has two sides, but we consider it to be an unpaired muscle. But if you really examine it, you'll find it has two sides. Not that it matters a big deal, but it is considered an unpaired, because it's just one piece together, as opposed to the levator velar palatini or the tensor or any other muscle. So it connects again directly onto the posterior nasal spine, like this. And then the other muscle, the palatopharyngeus, when it is forming, the tendon comes in, connects with the margin of the palatine bone, and then it goes over the Musculus uvulus, and goes and connects with the other side. And then the other tissue goes below the Musculus uvulus, connects with the other side. So it's almost like making a tunnel so that the Musculus uvulus can be left alone, connecting directly with the posterior nasal spine. And on all the other, left and right of that area, posterior nasal spine, then you have the muscles connecting directly on to the margins of the palatine bone. So this muscle, the Musculus uvulus, how it works is when it contracts, it lifts up and it shortens itself. Naturally, when it contracts, it's going to shorten itself and from the top, and then it will bunch itself up, so that will elevate. So at the same time, it will work together with the levator velar palatini, and then they're gonna lift up, and the levator is going to also pull back. So now you have two movements. And here's the origin, as I explained. Now, the tensor villi palatini is the muscle that actually gives, is the source that gives tissue to make the palatal aponeurosis. The origin of this tensor villi palatini, it is called tensor because primarily it is because it tenses the eustachian tube. So this is why it is called tensor. It arises from the scaphoid fossa of the sphenoid bone. If you just say the sphenoid bone, you're fine. And another origin from the lateral eustachian, lateral wall of the eustachian tube. So again, it has two origins. From the sphenoid, one origin, and as it goes down, it also is attached to the margins of the eustachian tube. So as it goes down, I'm going to explain here. Here's the muscle. If you take the levator villi palatini and cut it, under it you will find hidden the tensor villi palatini. So, and we said it has two portions, scaphoid, bone, and this is the eustachian tube. It connects to the lateral margin of the eustachian tube, just like the other one. So then, as it courses down, it comes close to a hamulus, a tip of bone that is a part of another bone, and then it turns into a tendon, and it goes under the hamulus, and it shows up on the other side, and it is still a tendon, and then it inserts onto the posterior margins of the palatine bone here. So this is the palatal aponeurosis that is formed by the tendon of the tensor villi palatini muscles. So this one comes here, comes to this point, and then it is going to find the musculus uvulus sitting here, connecting already on the posterior nasal spine. So this tissue is going to cross over, reach the midline. The other tissue reaches over to the midline, and they make a tunnel. And on the bottom, they do the same. And so this is muscle is kind of given, control, or kind of given some strength, because you make a tunnel for it this way, and then you hold it. You can make it stronger from the back. So then the palatoglossus and the the palatopharyngeus. So the palatoglossus, I'm going to show it to you here. These are, we call them the fascial pillars, or the palatal arches here. You can see them. You can open the mirror, look at your own. If you move the epithelial tissue here, you are going to see the arch, that the wall, the anterior wall of the arch. That is called the Palatoglossus. So it is coming from the palate, going down and connecting to the base of the tongue, the back and the base of the tongue. So it's called Palatoglossus. Glossus means tongue. So the origin, it originates from the anterolateral palatal aponeurosis. Anterolateral. Here is the muscle that we are talking about, that you saw, the palatoglossus. And here is the edge of the palatine bone, and here this tissue here is gonna be the palatal aponeurosis, and this is the origin of the muscle. So again, you go back sorry. Originates on the anterolateral. So you have the palatal aponeurosis and the anterior part of it and lateral to the side. And then it goes down, the muscle goes down like this and inserts onto the lateral posterior segments of the tongue. So it can actually, when it goes like that, can lift up the entire back of the tongue up. And if you constrict that or fixate it, you can lower the velum down. So this, because the two structures are flexible, the velum and the tongue, both of them. So if you fixate one, you can elevate the other. So this is a dual action muscle. It can either elevate the tongue or depress the velum. You notice behind this, there is the tonsil, and behind the tonsil there is another muscle, another wall that is part of the pharyngeal wall. I'm sorry, the palatal arches. That is the posterior wall of the palatal arches. That is the Palatopharyngeus. It comes down, but it goes back and connects with the pharynx. I'll show you. So here is the Palatoglossus, and attaching, to the almost, in a similar way on top, out of the palatal aponeurosis. Then it comes down, and then it goes back posteriorly, and then it connects, as you see, to the superior pharyngeal constrictor muscle. And it has other insertions as well. But what I want you to notice is that as it goes down, there is a triangle between its base and the base of the palatoglossus. And that triangle is where the palatine tonsils sit, as you see them in this image. So you have the palatopharyngeus, and then the palatine tonsil behind, you have the palatopharyngeus. So the palatopharyngeus, again, originates from the palatal aponeurosis and the posterior margins of the hard palate. Some of the fibers go laterally and they go downward to form the posterior walls of the fascial pillars, like you have seen, the making part of the fascial pillars of the posterior wall. And let me go back here. I'm going to show you in this image. So in this image here, when you look at this muscle here, that is the palatoglossus. You're looking from the other side. And the back one here is the palatopharyngeus. So some of the fibers, that are going down, as they go down to connect with the pharynx, they connect onto the posterior border, upper borders of the thyroid cartilage, and also they blend with the pharyngeal constrictor muscles. And the upper fibers, because it comes down like this, some of the fibers from the level of the aponeurosis, some of the fibers cross over to the other side, and they interdigitate and connect like this to anchor from above, and then the muscle goes down like that. So the action is to assist in narrowing the pharynx and also to assist in lowering the velum, laryngopharynx, lower the velum and assist in narrowing the pharynx. Now, we spoke about the adenoids and spoke about tonsils and stuff. So these are terms. Adenoidal or adenoid hypertrophy is the enlargement, abnormal enlargement of the adenoids. Tonsillar hypertrophy is the abnormal enlargement of the tonsils, the palatine tonsils inside of the mouth. when both of them are enlarged, you get the adenotonsillar hypertrophy. So that is in 66% of the cases in kids, mostly, you know, around 5 years, between 5 years and 6 years or so. Most of the cases happen when they have adenotonsillar hypertrophy, just because the facial plate is developing and developing at different times, and the ventilation in the air or oral tract and nasal cavity, it doesn't, is not optimal at some point in development. So it promotes infections and stuff. And these are all, the adenoids and the tonsils are part of the immune system. So anyways, the effect on resonance, we discussed it. If you get only adenoids, enlarged, you get hyponasality. If you get only tonsils enlarged, that's going to affect resonance a little bit, depending on how big they are. It's going to affect resonance, but it doesn't necessarily have like an abnormal resonance that you would identify as hyponasality, for example. However, if you have both the adenoid and the tonsils enlarged, and you have adenotonsillar hypertrophy, the result will be cul-de-sac resonance. So either hyponasal or hypernasal if, for example, there's not enough tissue or there's no closure in the posterior, end of the, between the velum and the pharyngeal wall. If there's no closure, adequate closure, then the person gets hypernasality, or there's a cleft palate, for example. So, and then these are the three things that we discussed yesterday. So here is the velum at rest. This is when we are breathing, sleeping, and so on. Normal tissue of the adenoid will be at that level. Now, this is if they are enlarged. They don't just block the airway, they also constrict, limit the air access to the eustachian tube. You need air to go through the eustachian tube from time to time to balance the pressure. But, that is enlarged adenoids and or, the tonsils. Usually, again, for the most part, they come together. That is going to affect the circulation. It will affect resonance, and it will lead to middle ear infections. It has a huge sequel of health, physical problems, speech problems, language problems, you name it. The muscles, facial muscles. First, we'll look at the tongue muscles. The tongue is made out of four muscles, and there are four that are intrinsic muscles that make the bulk of the tongue itself, and 4 muscles that are called extrinsic. The extrinsic muscles, exactly like we discussed the muscles, the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the larynx. And extrinsic, they usually have the origin outside, and then they send down and tissue and insert or attach onto the larynx. Here, the extrinsic lingual muscles, they come attach outside, and they come down and connect onto attach onto the tongue tissue, onto the intrinsic muscles. So the intrinsic muscles make the bulk, the tongue as we see it, and they are responsible for giving the fine-tuned movements of the tongue and the shaping the contour of the tongue in different ways. But the extrinsics are the ones that lift up the tongue and bring it back, or lift it up, bring it out, or pull it down, like ah, ooh, ee, the muscles that we discussed. So, but we'll go over them again here. So 4 intrinsic lingual muscles, and 4 extrinsic. The intrinsic ones, this is how it goes. Let me see, use this. First, the body of the tongue. Think about the tongue. It has thickness or width here, and I mean breadth here, with the top and bottom, and the thickness, and then width. And this is the tongue tip, and this is the bottom of the tongue. So you have longitudinal muscles, two sets of them. The fibers come from the back and go forward to the tongue tip, like that, called longitudinal lingual muscles. And one other set goes from under, like on the base of the tongue, and goes from back to front as well. And they end up, one going this way, the other going this way, and they enter and they connect at the tongue tip like this. You can look in the mirror and see where they connect, like this. So these are called, because these are from on the top, you call them superior, and then superior longitudinal muscles. And then the inferior ones, you call them inferior longitudinal, sometimes called longitudinal as well. I like to call them longitudinal. So it's like this. And then in between, there are vertical muscles. I mean, there's a vertical muscle in between, like this, like the springs of a mattress. You can imagine coils going, you know, all the way in between, like a sandwich. This is called the vertical lingual muscle. Vertical, that will be here, like springs of a mattress. The vertical lingual muscle. And then, from side to side, you have the transverse. So these are 4 lingual muscles that make the intrinsic muscle of the tongue. The superior longitudinal muscle, when it contracts, because it's connected at the tongue tip to the other one, the inferior, when the superior contracts, it's going to lift up the tongue tip like this. When the inferior contracts, it's going to bring down the tongue tip. It will do the opposite movement. So one goes that, one goes that. They reverse the movement of each other. Now imagine the transverse. When that muscle contracts, it will shorten. So what do you do to the width of your tongue? Like this. When it contracts, it shortens, it makes the tongue narrower and elongated. Because when you narrow it, you have the tissue has to spread somewhere. You narrow it, you spread it, you make it longer. So that muscle, the transverse muscle, is for protruding the tongue, narrowing it and protruding it out. The one muscle that is left is the vertical. Now the vertical sits in the middle, embedded. If you contract the muscle, it shortens. So the vertical is going to make it go like this. So what did you do now to the breadth of the tongue? You made it in like thinner here. But when you make it thinner, try it. What else do? You spread the tongue. You make it flatter and bigger like this. So flatter and bigger. So just, if you think about the names, they will make sense based on orientation. Muscle fibers coming from here to here, they are long. And they, you know, on top, we call superior, longitudinal, lingual muscle. And then the one that comes from the bottom, and it goes to the front, and the bottom, so inferior, longitudinal. And then the vertical, the coils, and that is vertical because standing like that. And then the transverse. And if you visualize each one and know how they contract and what, you know, that does to the tissue of the tongue, you will be able to explain it no matter what. There's no need to memorize. Get a mirror and do these movements, flatten your tongue, and kind of think, what is the muscle that makes you flatten it? Is it the transverse? Or is it the vertical? Try to lift up the tongue tip. What muscle enables you to lift it up? What muscle enables you to bring it down? By doing the movements like this yourself, you are going to remember them for a long, long time. So you can see here, here the superior longitudinal, inferior longitudinal, and then you have this one in the middle, that is the vertical, and then the transverse doesn't show because it runs from side to side, and you're looking here instead of here. Then you have the extrinsic lingual muscles now, the biggest of all, makes almost 2/3 of the tongue. That is, originates on the interior and the interior surface of the chin bone, and it fans posteriorly and superiorly like this. And when it contracts, it is going to elevate the tongue tip, and it will enable you to make pressure, to press the tongue tip against the alveolar ridge. So that is the muscle that enables you to make all alveolar sounds. T, d, s, z, and l. All these sounds, again, are possible by the, I didn't even say the name. All right, you figure it out. Chin. In Greek was gene, genio, and then tongue, genioglossus. The origin here, genio, and then glossus is tongue. Then we have the, let's see, here we said the styloid process, that little tip of bone coming down from the temporal bone, has 3 muscles. One of them goes from the styloid to the posterior end of the tongue, and that's called the stylo and then glossus. When 2 of them, when they contract, you can imagine coming down like this. When they pull up and back. What vowel do the styloglossus muscles make? Did they say ooh? Yes, you are right. Lifting the tongue up and high. So that's the second extrinsic lingual muscle, lingual or tongue muscle. Then that muscle that is attaches to the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, and originates on the hyoid bone and attaches to onto the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. That's called hyo, and then glossus. Hyoglossus. So that is the muscle that you use to make ah. It is very important that you know the muscle, how it works, where it originates, and what sound exactly it can help us make, or the sounds that it helps us make. So hyoglossus, genioglossus, and styloglossus. There is the 4th muscle that we mentioned before is the palatoglossus. Palatoglossus. And we mentioned that this muscle can either elevate the tongue or can lower the velum. So here you go, you got the 4 extrinsic and 4 intrinsic lingual muscles. You can see here the styloglossus, hyoglossus, genioglossus. What you do not see here is the palatoglossus. And this is what tells you about. So you notice that when we said sounds, we did not say speak about the intrinsic lingual muscles, because they just make these fine graded movements that are necessary for swallowing and for kind of some functions, basically for feeding and swallowing. And the extrinsic muscles actually I will take back some of this, because I mentioned that in the intrinsic the lingual muscles are elevate the tongue tip and bring it down. So I take this back. But mostly their movements are mostly dedicated to swallowing and to the fine-tuned movements. When you feed, you eat and swallow, your tongue moves in a mixed waves, side to side and back to front, so that it guides all the food down onto the middle of the tongue, so it can create like a spoon shape that is ready to make a bolus, and that bolus then is swallowed. So now we are going to look at the labial muscles, and that will end the labial and some of the nasal structures, but that will end the structure, the review of the structure of the articulators and of the vocal tract. Labial muscles that we focus on are the orbicularis. It is the muscle that encircles the mouth. It makes the lips, not the lips that you see here. It is under them, the muscle that is here. And it is like this. And the borders of the lips that you see that look like a worm, these are called the vermilion border, or the worm-like border, you know. So that's here. You have the actual muscular tissue that is called orbicularis, the rounded or circular muscle that makes the lips, upper and lower. Attaching laterally to the corners of the lips, this muscle here that you notice, comes as it goes toward the corner of the lips, it goes down here and here. That is called the risorius. When you contract it, you go like this. So you lift up the corners of, you retract the corners of the lips and lift it up to make that smile. This is why people say cheese, so that you say E, and that E, you don't have to say cheese, you could say E, and then that's your smile. Then we have, so here is the risorius, and the function of it is to when it contracts, it pulls the corners of the mouth up and back to retract the lips to either make you smile or say the sound E. And then we have this muscle, the levator labii superioris muscle. It elevates the lip here, like this one here. It elevates the lips up, like to express disgust. And there are two muscles. One is called, they come from the zygomatic or the cheekbone. These are called the zygomaticus major and zygomaticus minor. So the zygomaticus minor is here and the major is here. And when they contract, they lift up the corners of the lips further to make you laugh and to have a, also a smile. And they contribute to facial expression and speech. So the orbicularis is required for making all bilabial sounds like p, b, m, or all labial sounds like w, u, or like labio-dental, f, v. Then the buccinator muscle. Before that, the risorius, as I explained, the functions of it. Then the buccinator. This is the muscle. See, you could see zygomaticus major, minor, and beneath it, inside of the cheek is the buccinator. And so basically that muscle makes the middle muscle of the cheek, and when you are chewing, it kind of stiffens on both sides to prevent the food from falling into the pockets of your cheeks. the pockets of the cheeks are called buccal cavities, or buccus means pocket, buccal cavities. So the buccinator comes from the word buccus, or the pocket. So again, they constrict so that they come closer to your teeth and prevent the food as you are crushing it from falling between the tongue, between the teeth and the cheeks. Because if it does, it will cause rotting of teeth, it will cause bacteria and bad smell, it will cause, a lot of problems. So the buccinator is a protector, and when it works well, it prevents accumulation of food into the buccal cavities. So this is it for these muscles. I wanted to mention the labial muscles that bring the thing down, the lips down. This is the corner one. It is called the labii anguli, or depressor. One second, I don't want to get it wrong. Depressor labii inferioris. Depressor labii inferioris. This is the muscle, depressor labii inferioris. So it's basically the muscle that is below the lower lip, and that when it contracts, it brings it down, brings the lips down. And the one at the angle, you just will add the word anguli, means at the corner, at the angle, which is depressor angulioris. That is the one that is attached to the corners of the mouth, the lips. And when they contract, they pull the corners of the lips down, down like that, to express sadness or some kind of expressions that you make. Nasal structures. The basic nasal structures we like to highlight are the apex of the nose, the apex, the highest point of the nose, called the apex, and then the two nares, openings separated by the wall. That cartilage wall that you hold is called the septum. And as you feel it inside, it connects to the actual, it turns into bone, and that bone is the vomer bone that we discussed before. And then the nasal base is, you could go down here, the very point that where the upper lip meets with the base of the nose, that's the nasal base. The nasal cavity, basically, let me discuss it with the image. It has two chambers made by kind of the vomer bone, like a plow-shaped bone that goes, this is the back here of the throat, and then the nasopharynx part, and then the vomer bone starts like this, goes like plow-shaped, and then but it actually goes like this way up to here or so, and then the nasal bone connects on it, and then others structures connect on it. So anyways, looking at one side of the one nasal cavity, if you look here, this is also one side, and it has these groovy shelves, 1, 2, 3, called nasal conchae with an AE. These are for the air to circulate, to expand the surface, so when you breathe in, it acts just like how you construct an air conditioning unit, where the air circulates on plates, and then you get it cold on the other end. So this is very important in humidifying either humidifying the air, or extracting the humidity, or making it the right temperature as it comes in. It gets conditioned to the temperature of the body, so whatever you inhale is exactly similar like the temperature of your body, so it doesn't harm you. If you breathe through your mouth, then it starts to be to cause infections and stuff like that. You could see from the top, the base of the skull, the olfactory nerve, the smell nerve, comes and spreads all its extensions to line the nasal cavity, the top of the nasal cavity, with sensory, sensors for smell. And when you start eating or drinking, your body is 98 degrees. Whatever you have in your mouth then turns into jungle temperature, then starts to evaporate, and the parts of it are going to go into your, go through your velopharyngeal port, go up, and then they get detected by the, by the olfactory buds or ends here, and that detects the chemical composition of what you are swallowing or what you are eating, and that gives you your smell. And for this reason, taste is 80% smell. So when you have a cold, then all of this mucus is going to cover some of these things, and then you have no connection. You can't detect what you are eating or tasting, and you just, it doesn't make the food or in juice or whatever you're drinking taste as good. Okay. The nasal cavity is lined up with, mucus cells that make that mucus. So as you breathe in, you have allergens and dust particles and all kinds of things. And the mucus acts like a glue, and that attracts all these, these impurities. So that will enable you to get the air that is nice and clean. There are also nasal hairs in the front here. These attract big particles and things, and then as the first line filtering system. So by the time and then the air goes into the level of the velum, here, then you have now Waldeyr's ring, a ring made out of tonsils. You have the palatine tonsils, you have the lingual tonsils, you have the pharyngeal tonsils, otherwise known as the adenoid pads. So 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, three sets of tonsils. These together are part of the lymphoid system that is part of your immune system. And when whatever you swallow or inhale now is going to be will go through antibacterial fluid and stuff to purify it before it goes down to be ingested or to be inhaled. This is why we have these things as lines of defense to protect the body. So the nasal cavity is very, very important in many things. And in addition to all of these functions, it serves as a resonator, as a part of the vocal tract to resonate nasal sounds. So we end it here, and what is going to follow will be the other 2 parts. So thank you.